Alright, I have a question I want you to answer, but let me set the scene first. You are dropped into what appears to be late 19th century Paris, but the city is broken, splintered, fragments of its buildings and streets suspended mystically and interminably above your head. Also, Paris is now on an island. Beyond its shoreline lies a translucent shield, a dome that protects the city from an array of monsters whose sole aim seems to be the elimination of any human who crosses their path. These Nevrons, as you hear the locals call them, inhabit the continent that you can see just before the horizon, but they are, so it is said, not the only denizens of that land. There are also the Gestrels, a society of warriors whose existence is not quite certain. The legend of Esquier is similarly doubted, but his mythos is impactful enough for a statue of the rotund, masked creature to be erected in Lumiere's town square. Does anyone really know if these creatures exist? No, but the expeditioners are about to find out. As you watch, they step aboard their ship and, to many cheers and not a few tears, embark on a journey from which none have ever returned.
And soon, we'll get to do a lot more than throw rocks.
That's what all the other expeditions said.
Hey.
They do not sail into the abyss unprepared. You have heard stories of their abilities, the Pictos that are now a part of them, granting them incredible strength, speed, and resilience. And you now know they will need every last ounce of their power if they are to have any hope of defeating the Paintress, the giant figure who sits unmoving beneath her monolith, dominating the horizon, rising but once a year to repaint the number on the stone above her head, decreasing it by one and erasing all of Lumiere's citizens who have reached that cursed age. So my question for you, dear viewer, is simply this. What genre of story have you been dropped into? Is it fantasy, science fiction, cosmic horror, dystopian? Take a moment. Think about it. And while you do that, let me issue a quick word of warning. I will be talking about the end of this story, so if you don't want spoilers for Clair Obscur Expedition 33, here's your chance to avoid them. Just please be sure to hit the like button on your way out so the algorithm doesn't think I'm boring you. Okay, you have your answer, I trust. Great. My guess is that most of you said Expedition 33 at its outset presents itself as a fantasy story, or a dystopian one, or perhaps a bit of both. Sci-fi would be a stretch, especially considering the aesthetic of the world, and cosmic horror requires more tentacles, or, a wider reach than this apparently small-scale story. I personally would have categorized this game as fantasy. Pictos are basically magic, Nevrons and Gestrels are obviously fantastic creatures, and it's a tale about humanity's efforts to defeat an evil giantess who would otherwise cause their extinction. If you are like me, you thus would have expected the story to end in one of two ways. Either Expedition 33 would defeat the Paintress and save the world, or they would fail in their mission, but continue the grand tradition of laying the trail for those who come after, keeping hope alive even as humanity's final years came into view. Either way, I didn't doubt the ending would be bittersweet. Even if the expeditioners managed to take down the Paintress, surely no small sacrifice would be required. Many brave men and women would die on the road to victory. Certainly that would be a happier ending than the alternative where they all die, which would only have a hint of hope, but enough to sustain us, to make us believe that victory is still possible. I thought this a fantasy story, and thus an ultimately hopeful one, a tale that would give us some measure of what J.R.R. Tolkien in his essay on fairy stories calls the eucatastrophe, the unexpected and unrepeatable sudden joyous turn at or near the end of a particular narrative. And the thing is, in a way, both of my alternative and seemingly exclusive predictions came true. Expedition 33's main character lays down his life
For those who come after.
giving up his chance at victory, at glory, at life, so that others might live, might fight in his stead. And they do carry on his legacy, killing the Paintress and saving the world, or so they think. As it turns out, the Paintress was not the cause of their yearly erasure, but rather the only reason it was limited to Lumiere's eldest members. Why she didn't bother writing a less cryptic warning on her monolith is a discussion for another time, but it was totally possible, right? Anyway, this is the big twist of Expedition 33. The world we have experienced is a canvas, a magical painting, a fantasy world, even within the fictional world of the game. But now it is seen in a different light. Fantasy literature is created so that others can read it, and by doing so participate in the act of subcreation. When Tolkien describes the Shire, or Lewis describes Cair Paravel, or Sanderson describes Luthadel, what do you see? Now, film versions of most of those works do exist now, so you and I likely picture in our minds what we have seen with our eyes, but try to remember, imagine if you must, how you pictured those landscapes, those skies, those cultures and peoples before you ever saw them on screen. Reading fantasy invites us to join the author in the discovery of his world, as we take his descriptions and translate them into images in our own minds. Your vision of a terraformed Mars, that's a Red Rising reference in case you weren't sure, might look quite different than mine. And that's one of the many beauties of fairy stories. We make them, in a sense, our own. They spark our imaginations. Not so here. This painted world does not have sub-creators. I mean, it kind of does, as the other Dissanders are attempting to influence the canvas, but that's more of a destructive and devastating war than it is a cooperative act that would add beauty to the world. Rather, the participants in the world, the citizens of Lumiere, do not, by and large, know that they are the product of someone else's imagination. The canvas is not a place where everyone's imagination and whimsy can run wild. Not anymore, anyway. It is not an escape that intends to heighten and improve our understanding of our own world. It is, in fact, the opposite. Fantasy for Aline Dissandre is no longer the escape of the prisoner, a place where she can picture a new and brighter future beyond the walls of her cell. Instead, it has become her cell.
Sometimes we paint the bars of our own prison.
This is a remarkable inversion of fantasy. Expedition 33 takes that genre and shows what can happen when we choose to lose ourselves in this great power of subcreation. This is not a fantasy story. It is, instead, the tale of someone in our world, or a fictionalized version of it, using fantasy the wrong way. In other words, it is a drama. And I'd like you to think of a few excellent dramas from this century. Some of my favorites are Breaking Bad, The Wire, Succession, and Better Call Saul. What do all of these have in common? They are tragedies. They show how men can fall prey to vice, to the allure of power and the demands of pride, how we are so easily made victims of the circumstances of our birth, our education, and the systems within which we work and live, how all the money in the world is insufficient for those who would crush their families under their heel for a few dollars more. To again reference on fairy stories, tragedy is the true form of drama, its highest function, but the opposite is true of fairy story. So if you, like me, had a distinctly negative gut reaction to this twist in Expedition 33, this is why. You had believed you were inside a fantasy story, but suddenly found yourself in a drama. You were sold one type of story, only to find its polar opposite waiting for you. And look, this is not me bashing the execution of this twist. The signposts and foreshadowings were all there. Every cryptic conversation between Renoir and Verso, not to mention Alicia's haunting poem, served as a clue as to what was really going on here. All the same, first impressions are important, and the initial sense I, and possibly you, had for this game was that it was a fantasy story about saving the world, and we love those stories. My most recent video was about such a narrative. Avatar: The Last Airbender is incredibly simple in its premise, but that never held it back for a second, never stopped it from leaving an indelible mark on its audience. It's because of my continued love for fantasy stories such as Avatar that I finally decided I can no longer simply critique and comment. I need to create. So, as of today, the beginning of November, I've begun the writing process for my own fantasy novel. I have spent months outlining, developing character arcs, world building, and now it's time to let the story take shape. If you want to follow along with my process as I blitz out 50,000 words in the next 30 days, go to samrodinauthor.com. Look, there's a progress bar. There's also an email list for updates beyond this month, so get on that too. If you want more in-depth book updates and want to support the channel and my battle to reinvigorate humanity's love of good stories, please consider joining my Patreon, where you can get behind-the-scenes content, participate in polls to select future videos, and even suggest your own video ideas. I actually posted an unscripted video earlier this week where I talked about this very subject and received feedback from patrons that helped moderate my position somewhat. As I said earlier, I do not want to give the impression that Expedition 33's plot twist is in any way unearned or bad writing. It's not. But it did leave many players feeling betrayed. Some have since gotten over that, myself included. I took the story for what it was, examined it in extreme detail to see what I liked, what I loved, and what I did not appreciate, and found that even in Act 3, the detail put into the character work and the emotions, both positive and negative, that they elicited within me were well worth my time. This game is a phenomenal work of art. I know I focus heavily on the story, which is incredible, but the art direction, combat, and soundtrack are all sublime. I chose that word intentionally. When something is sublime, it inspires wonder, an emotion that we long to experience. Men travel to the ends of the earth and beyond to marvel at the grandeur of creation. It is this same wonder that fantasy seeks to evoke from us as we explore new worlds. Such a feeling naturally lifts us up, urging us to desire greatness, to witness and pursue virtue, to conquer evil and see good restored. It is a pure and uncomplicated emotion that originates in the most incorruptible part of our hearts. That is why the twist hurts so much. Not because it tells us that this wonderful world, this amazing story of courage and hope, and these unbreakable bonds of friendship aren't real, but because it shows us that they are being used, that the gods of this world, so to speak, are playing with the lives of the characters whom we love as if they are but pieces on a chessboard, happily sacrificed for the supposed good of the painter or paintress. And to be clear, for this to be a proper tragedy, which it is, the people of the canvas have to be real. Less real than the Dissandras, perhaps, but still individuals with inherent worth. Otherwise, the ending decision simply isn't complicated at all. Alicia and Aline just need to touch grass. But as the game's creative director said, there is no good ending, no right choice, just two unfortunate ones. Choices that Mael and Verso feel forced into because of the countless poor decisions that they and their parents have made. Feel free to argue with me about this in the comments, but you're also arguing with the guy who's in charge of the entire story, so... Anyway, in case you were wondering why that twist felt so wrong, there you have it. You were sold, or believed you were sold, a fantasy story, a narrative in a genre that ought always to seek eucatastrophe in its endings, should strive to show its audience a piercing glimpse of joy far beyond that which can be obtained in this life. And as I said earlier, Expedition 33 does give you that, but it doesn't stop there. It takes that joy and turns it into grief. It betrays you, which is, in its own way, brilliant. I don't doubt for a second that Guillaume Broche and company knew exactly what they were doing when they wrote this plot twist. They had to know that players would feel deceived, tricked, backstabbed, and bamboozled, as did the characters.
You fucking coward! You betrayed us!
For all the pain that this revelation may have caused, there can be no doubt that it was a brilliant way to get the player inside the narrative, connecting with the characters in a way few other stories have ever accomplished. So yes, Expedition 33 hurts you with its plot twist. It does so intentionally. It wants you to feel Ciel's agony as her hope is ripped away right after she rediscovered it. It wants you to join Lune in glaring daggers at Verso as he destroys his entire world, and her along with it. It wants you to look on in sorrowful horror as Mael refuses to let anything change in her perfect world. None of the myriad of emotions that assail us as the story reaches its tragic conclusion, whichever ending you choose, would be nearly as poignant if the story had not given us such grand hopes. Such is the nature of Clair Obscur, the use of light and shadow to enhance each other. You might love this twist. You might hate it. You may have seen it coming a mile away. You may have been completely blindsided by it. Regardless, you cannot deny the artistry of it. And in an age where quarterly profits have eclipsed artistic expression on the priority list of far too many allegedly creative companies, I will happily take the story that strives for creativity and authenticity rather than chasing trends. Well, not exactly happily, but you get my point. And that's it. Those are my thoughts on Expedition 33's big twist. If you would like more of my thoughts on this game, go watch this video. You better get a snack ready. Thanks for watching, God bless, and I will see you next time. And of course, thank you to all my generous patrons, especially the members of my Hero and Champion tiers, Cameron Wagner and Tom Tennyson 1337.